Hi Bat fans, we're here in Blanche Cave at Naracoorte Caves National Park to talk about the critically endangered southern bent-wing bat. And I've got here with me Lou Way from the Limestone Coast Landscape Board and Rose Thompson from Nature Glenelg Trust.
Rose, tell us a little bit more about what captured your interest on bats and what your bat journey has been.
Yeah, so I actually got into bats through volunteering here at the Naracoorte Caves with a PhD researcher about 7 years ago. She was looking at the survivorship of different cohorts of the southern bent-wing bat. So we were catching lots of bats and microchipping them, measuring them, all sorts of things like that. And I just became really fascinated with bats in general and pretty much just went down a bat rabbit hole and yeah, became really interested in bats. And I've worked with bats since then in Australia and overseas, and I still volunteer to help out researchers here at the caves, and I'm also involved in the national recovery team for the southern bent-wing bat as well.
What kind of bats or how many types of bats have we got here in the Limestone Coast?
We have a lot of bats here in the southeast. They're not something that people come across a lot. We don't tend to see bats, but we actually have about 15 species of bats in the southeast, and that includes the large grey-headed flying foxes. So they're quite big, and often people are a bit more familiar with them because they're so large and we can see them a bit easier. And then all of our other species, there's 14 species of microbats. So they're very small and they feed on insects, whereas the flying foxes feed on fruit and nectar.
So where would we generally see bats? Where would we find bats?
Bats are found worldwide, everywhere basically except Antarctica, in every continent, and they're found in a huge variety of different habitats, so drier places, wetter places, deserts, all sorts of things like that. Here in the southeast they can be found in natural areas, so our woodlands, wetlands, things like that. They also, because our woodlands and wetlands these days are within an agricultural landscape, bats also do make use of those spaces as well. And some bats are quite adapted to urban spaces as well.
So I suppose the most important question I wanted to ask you today was, why should we care about bats?
Well, all wildlife has their own intrinsic value, but bats do some very special things that benefit us and the environment. The first two are pollination and seed dispersal, so these are actually more relevant on the east coast and in northern Australia. But flying foxes are really important pollinators of a bunch of different eucalypt species and lots of other plants as well. So as they're going around every night looking for nectar, they put their face in the flowers and then they get pollen all over their face and take it to a new flower, and that's how pollination can occur. Similarly with fruit-eating bats, they'll be eating fruit and they'll be consuming also seeds with the fruit, and then they disperse that throughout the forest, and that can play an important role in forest regeneration. And then the third thing that bats do for us, or that is beneficial for us, is actually insect control, and this one's really important, or the most important one here in the southeast, because most of our bats are insectivorous. So they're out every night consuming lots and lots of bugs, and this obviously saves agriculture in terms of pesticides that need to be used. So there's been a couple of studies recently, one from New South Wales on the cotton industry, that found that the benefit of bats to the cotton industry in particular is worth about $64 million
Wow.
per year. Yeah, so it's pretty huge savings that bats do for us basically. And then here in the southeast, the southern bent-wing bat has been recently found to consume about 60 or at least 60 species of moths, and a number of those were also agricultural pest species.
That's pretty amazing, and I suppose it's like free pest control.
Yeah, that's right.
And it just makes me think that for landholders, bats are pretty much a really good asset to start considering, or to consider as part of maybe an integrated land management approach to managing their properties.
Yeah, definitely. They're definitely friends, good friends to have around.
So how far would bats travel? Do they have quite a small home range, or do they fly quite far?
They actually can fly really far. So despite being really small animals, for example, the southern bent-wing bat only is about 15 to 18 grams. Their body is about 5 centimetres. But we know now that they can travel at least 70 kilometres in a night. So they've been recorded travelling from here at the Naracoorte Caves to near Glencoe, which is about 70 kilometres, and it's just an incredible distance for such small animals to travel.
And It sounds like they're quite good at catching small insect-sized bugs, but everyone knows the saying, blind as a bat. So are bats really that blind? Is there any truth behind that?
No, there's really not. So no bat species are actually blind, and actually our flying foxes and a lot of different fruit-eating species do use vision really well, and they use vision to find fruit and flowers and things. Our insectivorous species rely more heavily on echolocation, so that's actually getting a picture of the world through sound waves. So bats emit really high frequency sounds through their nose or their mouth, and as those sound waves hit an object and then bounce back towards the bat can get a really clear picture of what's around it, and that works even though the bat's moving and maybe their insect prey is also moving. Yeah, it's really incredible.
So we're here today at the amazing Naracoorte Caves. Why are caves important to bats, and what makes Naracoorte Caves such an important site?
Well, actually most of our bats in the southeast roost in trees, so behind bark and in hollows and things like that. But the critically endangered southern bentwing bat only roosts in caves, and we know we've got a lot of caves in the Limestone Coast, so any cave in this region is potentially habitat for the southern bentwing bat. But here at the Naracoorte Caves is actually one of just 3 maternity sites for the species. They only have their babies at 3 caves, and one is here at Naracoorte Caves, and then 2 are in Victoria. And so that's why this is a really special site.
And if people want to see bats, is this one of the best places to come and witness bats in their natural habitat?
Yeah, definitely. So bats are generally pretty hard to interact with or see because they're out at night and they're very small. And yeah, we don't just come across them very often in our day-to-day lives. But here at the Naracoorte Caves, there's a really excellent bat tour, which I highly recommend to everyone. There are cameras within Bat Cave, and they give really amazing live footage where you can see what the bats are up to in real time, and you can hear them socialising with each other, and see them grooming each other and getting ready for the evening and that kind of thing. And then even if you don't do the tour, you can pop down to Bat Cave at sunset and watch as 20,000 bats emerge from the cave, and it's just a spectacular sight with the sunset behind. It's really amazing.
Wow. Outside of being here and seeing bats at Naracoorte Caves, what should people do if they come across a bat?
If you come across a bat just roosting, like it might be in your veranda or your shed or something like that, you can just leave it. It doesn't really need to be disturbed or anything like that. If you have a bat in your house and it's flying around and you want it to leave, you can open the doors and windows and try and encourage it to leave that way. But if you come across an injured bat, the most important thing to remember is not to touch. Distressed wildlife can bite and injure you, so the critical thing to remember is just to get in touch with a local wildlife carer as soon as possible, and they know how to safely handle bats, so they'll be able to assess the bat and help it if it needs.
So I suppose now that we've heard about how unique and important bats are, how can we as the general community help and protect them?
We can do a couple of things. So limiting pesticide use is important as much as possible because, as we mentioned, most of our bats here in the southeast are insectivorous. Another really important thing to do is keeping cats indoors, especially at night. They can be really detrimental to a lot of our native wildlife. And then things like, if you're a landholder, protecting and enhancing natural areas on your properties, so whether that's woodlands, wetlands, caves, protecting and enhancing those biodiversity values there. And if you're not a landholder, just getting involved in local habitat restoration projects and things like that.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's all we have time for. So thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge about bats with us.
No worries, thank you.
And if anyone has any questions, please leave them below, and we look forward to hearing what you guys want to know. Thanks, Rose.
Thanks.